What's up? My name is Jonathan, and this story takes place around California, one of the safest towns in America specifically. During this story, I was between 10 and 17 years old. Now I'm 19. Some context. We lived in a 2-story house that had 2 rooms downstairs and 3 upstairs. My family consists of mom, dad, older brother, older sister, 5 dogs, and me being the youngest. Last thing my family believed, my sister and I had a third eye, since we could predict a lot of stuff. But for now, we are only going over the spirits part of it. Now we begin. The experiences started pretty much right away when we moved in. One night, I was taking a shower. I saw a little girl outside, looking at me. She looked to be around 6 or 7. She had long, straight black hair and was wearing white pajamas. But after that, I got out and she ran away. But I followed her. She disappeared completely when she went to my sister's room, and I actually saw her later that night in my dreams. She informed me that her name was Alice, and she needed mine and my sister's help getting rid of 2 bad men. I agreed to it, but first, she needed my sister to see her. So, she played with my sister's stuffed animals. Then my sister asked me if I touched them. I told her it was Alice, and that Alice wanted to talk to her. Of course my sister freaked, but she met Alice later that night, and my sister agreed to help. The very last request Alice made was not to tell anyone else, as once I do, they will all be able to see the men and her. After that talk, I immediately saw one of the men. I went to the bathroom, and walking back from it, I saw a really tall, white-sheeted figure standing in the loft. He looked at me, and I felt so much fear, anxiety, and dread. He came after me, and I quickly ran to my room and closed the door. I cried hard, really hard. I couldn't stop because I was feeling pure terror coursing through me. After that, I questioned if I should even bother helping, but I still tried. Time and time again, I would run into him, and he would chase me. He never really made noise, but he would tell me to stop running, although I never listened. It took a few more months, but I finally broke and told my family. They all believed me as they were feeling the pressure from him, and were all getting stress from it. Well, after that, my father saw the white figure. He was facing a corner of the loft and looked back at my dad, and it terrified him. For my brother, however, he never saw anything in that house. He only ever felt pressure. But he did manage to record my guardian angel one time, opening his room door and checking on me. I'm still sad that the phone that had the video was destroyed in an accident. Moving on to my mother. She was actually able to communicate with the man, but doesn't remember a single thing he said, as most of the memories in that house disappeared from her, mainly due to my mom's multiple mental illnesses. But my sister did manage to see my mom talking to the air, but it was weird. My sister heard a deep male voice that had a lot of authority to it next to my mother. However, she recognized that voice that it was coming from our mom, and it scared my sister really, really badly. After that incident, time went by, and my aunt, we'll call her Tia, and my grandmother, who we'll call Nina, moved in with us, and they had experienced numerous of things. First, Tia kept on hearing running upstairs when she was home alone. She would hear thumps and bangs, and even two male voices talking. Nina, on the other hand, meet Alice, but sadly could not communicate with her. The last story with them is about Tia. She got up really early every morning to go to work, like around 4 a.m. And one time, when she was going upstairs to use the bathroom, she bumped into somebody really hard that she was knocked down. But there was nobody around, and realized she didn't even hear anyone else make a noise or fall. Those are the only stories I have of Tia and Nina. But moving on. So I had 5 dogs at the time, and all of this and all of them would look upstairs and growl, bark, and just watch very intently. One time, my poodle even went upstairs, and something hurt her very badly. We had to get a cast for her paw. It seemed something crushed her bones in her paw. Last small story, before we get back to the main story, is about my friends. They, to this day, say that the night they spent in the loft is the scariest moment for all of them. You see, there was 4 of them, and the first time they came over was when everything barely just started happening. I had them sleep in the loft, and they all said that a tall sheeted man was harassing them all night and scaring them. At the time, they were the only ones to see his face, and said half his face looked cut off. My friends would come over almost every weekend, but after that moment, refused to go anywhere near the loft. Now, to get back on track, after some time, I started to see visions in my sleep of Alice's death. She was taken by the same sheeted man and brought to another man who wore a very dirty suit. He looked very disorganized, but he had a Freddy Krueger type glove and slashed Alice. I kept seeing this over and over until one day I saw the killer. When I had to take a shower, I would have to cross the loft, and there I saw him, crawling on all 4s, stared at me intently, with so much hate. He gave off an even more sinister presence than the white sheet. He was pure evil, and something I did not want to deal with anymore. Unlike the white sheet, this killer never attacked anyone, but he was just terror. Have you seen the movie Insidious, and the scene where the medium draws the demon on the ceiling? He's similar to that, and he would even crawl up the walls like that. After he started to show himself, my dad saw him and actually began to sleep downstairs instead of his own room, just because of how often he was seeing him in the room and terrifying my own father. My sister was getting super stressed from everything and told Alice she was not helping anymore. My sister never saw Alice after that. For me, there wasn't anything I could even do. I was far too scared to even look at the men, and I was getting mentally damaged from seeing them all the time that I had to tell Alice I was done too. I was 15 then, and Alice looked so sad and disappointed and told me goodbye. I didn't want her to leave, but I couldn't stop her, and she vanished. And that was the last I saw of her and the 2 men. Things actually calmed down a little bit, but then, shortly after, my family started to break down. My parents divorced because my brother nearly died in college, and my dad refused to travel to see him. My mom, however, never forgave him for that. My sister suffered with major depression and severe bipolar disorder, even PTSD, just from everything. As for me, the events from Alice and the men, and other personal stuff, drove me to a breaking point, and I developed severe paranoid schizophrenia. The paranoia of not seeing the men anymore, the feeling of dread and death drove the development. The spirits, mixed with anger and hatred from everyone, built and broke everything and everyone. We decided we needed to move on from that house, so we moved to where we are now. Everything appears to be fine. My brother is back to good health. My sister lives up in Seattle, pursuing her dream of music production. My dad and mom deciding it was best to live together still. And me, who is making comics professionally. Things really hit the fan in the old place, and it almost tore my entire family in two. The anger and fear that old house had was too much for us to handle. Now, we still have paranormal activity, but it's a complete 180 compared to that old rickety house. If I were to give advice to anybody about spirits, never help them, as sometimes they will pull you and everybody else into something none of you have the power to help with. Thank you. When I was a child, I had a horrible experience of a stay at our past home. The details of the house itself are fuzzy in my mind, but I can remember it being in poor condition and served as the house of rodents, as we couldn't afford much at that time. As for my experience, I remembered it being constantly put in despair, as every night I slept, I had a nightmare. Not a single night did I get an ounce of sleep, due to me waking up in cold sweat. One I could vividly remember was the following. In the dream, I woke up to my mother missing and the buzzing of the TV static downstairs. Being curious, I decided to peek out of our bedroom door and walk a few steps down. My father was passed out on the couch, and the bathroom door, which was at the farthest right to him, was open, with the lights turned on. I felt reassured, but only for a moment. As soon as Mother walked out the bathroom, I felt this dread consume my insides as I snapped my attention to my father, who was now awake. Except, I don't think it was him. His eyes were only the color of white, and he stood perfectly still. Until he saw my mother, in which case, he slowly walked toward her, with her being unsuspecting and oblivious. The nightmare ended with me, my mother, and my father, all letting out the most blood-curdling screams that pierced my ears as I watched him kill her in front of me. Looking back now, I have no idea how that manifestation of horror came to be, as my parents always avoided exposing me to horror films or books. But it doesn't end there. While my nightmares may have ceased when we moved houses, I think that sinister being that caused me all that suffering has moved itself into reality. I became older and more aware of the things happening around me. I became more playful and happy as soon as I started to forget what happened to me at that house. Then, in one game of hide and seek, I was playing with my brother. I hid under a blanket. I remember giggling, thinking it was a good spot. But then everything went quiet, like the world outside that blanket was muted by someone. Then, I heard the familiar creak of our front door. I heard mumbles, whispers, and soft talking coming from the person that came in. They walked closer, and I realized it was my father, or so I thought. He started walking closer, asking where I was. I giggled a little louder, giving away my spot foolishly. Then, the voice stopped, but I saw a faint silhouette in front of the blanket. It was an uncomfortably long pause, so I just threw away my blanket, hoping to surprise him. But he wasn't there. Confused, I asked my brother and mother where he was, but both said that he hasn't come home from work yet. I decided to just ignore that moment altogether and think it was just my mind playing tricks with me, until a few years later. I was in the bathroom, just finishing taking a bath, when I heard the same things again. I froze, remembering the familiarity of it all, and pressing my ear up against the door. He asked again where I was, but this time, my brother's voice chimed in with a few mumbles. I felt relieved, thinking that since my brother was also talking, it must be real. Although a part of me still felt suspicious, I told him I would be right outside, and I changed into my clothes. Then, I opened the bathroom door, and once again, he wasn't there. Yet again, my brother and mother said he wasn't home from work. Up to this day, I'm still confused as to what I heard. Maybe it was just me being a child with a wide comprehension of imagination. Or maybe it was real. If so, then why did it manifest itself as my father, of all people? And what would happen if it came back? And this time, I become fully fooled by its imitations.